right. So I was doing my speech for today. I came across a fairly amazing statistic. And it is that every year we kill, we eat 10 billion animals. Now, if you tied them all together, not only would they stretch to the moon and back once or twice, but 5 times. So I'm thinking, now I know why there's a shortage of chefs. They're all out there smashing down, butchering, cooking, grilling, barbecuing, broiling, boiling 10 billion animals. And I think that's quite an amazing statistic. I want to quote you Barthes, who is a French structuralist and semiologist. I don't even know what a semiologist is, and it's my speech. Does anyone know what a semiologist is? Study of science. Okay. Well, this is what Barthes said, because I think he really nailed it about meat. He said, "Steak is the signifier of bourgeois myths. Beef is the global reward of status, achievement, blood, and muscle. Cows eat the world, and rich eat cows. Simple, monoglot exclamations of social and economic triumph." I thought that was rather good, no? He nailed it, right? He nailed it. Anyway, so my name is Ross Lewis, as you heard. I studied food science, dairy science at UCC before I became a chef. I've been a chef for the last 30 years. I became a chef because cooking at its essence, the magic for me was about creating something to serve to somebody that gave them satisfaction. And by the way, in the city and the time that I grew up in, there was a chef in every house. Could you believe that? We had chefs in everyone's house. They were called your mother. And they passed down the technique of cooking from generation to generation, which I also read another statistic that we're now in the 3rd generation without that happening in the home. Essentially, when I was asked to speak today, I wanted to speak about myself, and they said, "No, you've only got 15 minutes. We don't have 2 hours." So I said, "Okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to speak about the vision for Irish food, this wonderful land that we live in, that I've been cooking in for 30 years. They said, "Well, you can't do that either because Mark Moriarty is going to do that." And I says, "Jesus Christ, what am I going to talk about?" So I'll tell you what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about food in general, my experience from my perspective, the vision for food in the future, for restaurants, food production, agriculture, diet. And I think it's necessary to look slightly into the past and the present if we're going to look at all that. My favorite book, cookery book, is a book called Cooking for Kings. I don't know if anybody here has ever read it, but it chronicles the life of a chef called Antonin Carême. And the reason I like that is because he was plucked out of obscurity and he became very famous for what he did. He was passed around the noble houses of Europe. He worked for the Rothschilds, he worked for the Romanovs, he worked for King George IV. And no less, in 1829, Lady Morgan, who was an Irish travel writer, would you believe there was an Irish travel writer in 1829? Anyway, that one got me as well. She was a wit and a fervent nationalist, and she described Carême as the chef to the celebrities. And I thought, then he was probably the first chef ever to get notoriety for what he did, and a very important character. The other interesting thing is that Anton was on a part-time fee of 6,000 francs in 1829, which is 125,000 euros in today's money. So by Christ, he wasn't badly paid either. Anyway, you fast forward into the 20th century, and just to tell you, I have cooked through a lot of trends. I suppose the people that were at the forefront of cooking when I started We're the French, and I've seen French cuisine bourgeois, cleaned up by Paul Bocuse into nouvelle cuisine. There was cuisine naturelle, cuisine mincere. Then latterly, science and technology reversed into the kitchen, and we had the era of molecular gastronomy. Now we've gone to a more natural form, a local form, founded by René Redzepi in Denmark. So we have the Nordic food movement, and I even hear them talking now about post-Nordic food movements. So the bottom line is that food trends will always come and go. Like all those things, what they need is it's like anything. It's a time product, it's a place. It needs the consumer, and it needs an economic environment, and that's what creates them. They also need a lightning rod. For molecular gastronomy, that was Ferran, and he got the world's media attention to Spain, and the same that René Redzepi has done in Denmark. What made the early chefs famous was, I suppose, the Michelin Guide, which is invented for traveling salesmen going down the Rhone corridor. I suppose print media as well. But the difference between them and today's chefs is that our guys today have got global reach. And the reason that they have global reach is, I suppose, the most important thing to happen to cooking and food in my time, which is obviously the internet. So everyone's story can be found. Not only is it about the content, but it's also about the connectivity, and that connectivity is important. When you look at restaurants like Fäviken in Norway, or in Sweden, probably a restaurant that may not have survived 30 years ago because nobody would ever have found out about it. But once you have that connectivity, you have an increasing amount of people who will travel the world and go to restaurants, and even if it's hard to get to them. Our restaurant industry is the most dynamic industry in the world, I would say. I'm very, very proud to be part of it. The reason it's so dynamic is that at its lifeblood is a young, transient, flexible workforce. And they are taking this industry further and further all the time. It is a very flexible industry. Restaurants are never extinguished, even though there are revolutions and recessions. They survive better in good economic climates, of course. But restaurants are important because, as we all know, food is about flavor and taste. And as Phil Howard says, it's about that deep, satisfying exchange in the plate. But it's not just about that. It's about emotion. It's about exchange of emotion, well-being. It's about an exchange of culture. It's about an exchange of knowledge and tradition. And it's important because it provides a social platform for friendships and family bonding. In the world today of restaurants, we have, I suppose, three clearly divided sectors. You have fast food, which isn't great, and I don't see it changing very quickly. You have a middle market, which is very exciting. It's increasingly delivering a very, very good product onto the marketplace. It seems to be able to deal with market conditions and having a lack of chefs. It's usually finding very neat, concise formulas, short menus, well-researched, well-delivered, well-packaged, well-marketed, well-bound up in social media and all the rest of it. It's very exciting. I would think that in that sector, you will see over the next while another part which will be concerned about nutrition, because nutrition is very important, and that has to happen. At the upper end of the market, I think that will be inhabited by less and less restaurants. I think these restaurants will become increasingly expensive because they will be increasingly expensive to put up and run. I think that there won't be 4 or 5 in every city in the world, but there might be 1 or 2. I think they will be put some of them into their own environment, where the key is sustainability, biodiversity, and using the product. They'll be put into farms. They'll probably put on the oceans. Why couldn't they be put on the sea and serve the fish that swim around them? I don't think there's a limit to where they can be put because people will travel. They will consider getting there as part of this exciting journey and this exchange. That brings us on to agriculture. Sorry, I just got a little drink. Did you put the vodka in that? You did? Thanks. Our agriculture started 11,500 years ago. Neolithic agriculture, we had rotation of crops, irrigation, fertilization. We moved forward, that's when the problem started, 1969, the Green Revolution. This is when we intensified farming, battery animals, with intensive farming, lots of fertilizer, huge amounts of chemicals. This was the era of farming was defined by the maximum output for the minimum input. So what's wrong with the food at present? I suppose the agricultural system, there's less people employed. We are producing cheaper food. Cheaper food is not good for you. If the defining criteria for selling food is that it's cheap, the defining criteria for making it is that it's cheap. Cheap food is no good for anybody. It causes ill health. What other problems are there with agriculture today? Sustainability, biodiversity, food waste, antibiotics. Half the antibiotics consumed in the United States of America are consumed by animals. 3 million pounds of them. And then, of course, comes along GMOs, the great white knight. Well, GMOs are not important because they're more productive. GMOs are important because you can patent them. They're untested, they're undemocratic, and what's even worse, they're uncontainable. An absolute disgrace. We also have reduction of soil fertility, reduction of arable land, water shortages, global warming, weather patterns. Jesus Christ, you'd be forgiven for thinking there's nothing right with agriculture and our food system today. Then there's our seas. Now here's the rub about the seas. What's great about the seas is it's the cheapest way to produce protein. We can feed 450 million people from the seas every day if we want to. And this is the really unique thing about the seas. We know that intensive agriculture destroys biodiversity. But we know that increasing biodiversity in the seas increases production of fish. So it's a no-brainer. No-brainer. So what do we have to do to protect the seas? We have to do 3 things, because we know this. You have to adhere to quotas, you have to stop bycatch, and you have to protect spawning grounds. We know this because it's been done with the Norwegian herring and the Arctic cod. So in terms of diet, what's wrong? We're overeating. Let me give you another little simple statistic. When they readdressed and redrew the food pyramid in the United States in the recent few years, half the people that worked on it were associated and attached to big food companies and agricultural companies. We know that a plant-based diet will make us more healthy. And we know that eating too much meat and processed carbohydrates makes us sick. We have the obesity epidemic. They're spending $150 billion every year on the obesity problems in the United States. That's to go up to $300 billion in the next decade. Yet, funnily enough, 95% of cardiovascular and diabetic conditions can be cured by what? One simple thing, diet. We know for sure, it's proven that only 3 to 5% of cancers are genetic. So where is it all coming from? It's not until last year that the World Health Organization comes out and says that yes, actually glyphosates do cause cancer. Something that the big companies that make them have known for the last 15 or 20 years. So you'd be forgiven for thinking there's nothing right. There is lots of things right. And there is lots of angels out there. The tide is turning, in my belief. And I suppose if I had to summate for you my future vision of food, it is this. The diet of developed nations has to change. This is without question. We have to move to a more plant-based diet, and away from meat is not an option, but it is a certainty. This is something we have to consider as chefs, and for those chefs who have global reach, I think it's important. Nutritious and healthy food will be the cornerstone of healthcare. Agriculture and aquaculture has to change to protect biodiversity in our climate. Farmers will be the guardians of our biodiversity. There will inevitably be a backlash, not from government or politicians, but from the consumer against large food and ag industry who are poisoning the world and its population. Expect to see food vendors become specialists. They will involve in-house chefs, nutritionists offering medical advice. They will sell only food and not tires and bicycles and glue and etc., etc. The food companies and manufacturers of the future that will be successful will be the ones that solve, not create, our health problems. Medicine will have to change from its current model where doctors' education is influenced by drug companies. The medical world will have to work with more joined-up thinking. Homeopathic treatments and food will play a large part in this, including the treatment and prevention of most diseases. We must think not just about treating the symptoms of disease, but the prevention if we're to free ourselves from this huge burden of universal medical expense. In 1993, we spent 70 billion in the world on coronary heart bypasses. That's in 1993. So it's very obvious to me, for all the reasons that I have outlined to you here today, that we will be asking each and every one in the developed world to take personal responsibility for their diet, not just from the perspective of health, but also in the way that it will influence food production and agriculture. So here's the rub. Where does that leave the chef of the future? What does he or she look like into the future? Well, I can't answer that specifically, but what I do know is they cannot remain food politically and nutritionally agnostic. I suspect that the role of the chefs will move, influenced by nutrition, sustainability, food production, to include healthcare and biodiversity, so that we are not merely just providers of simple monoglot exclamations of social and economic triumph. Thank you for listening today.